Thursday in Simpsonville, South Carolina, and again, it's a beautiful, beautiful day. It's going to be in the low 70s today, and truly a beautiful spring day. Romans chapter 13. Again, to try to get context, if we think about Romans 12 and 13, as we've read them so far, Paul seems to be dealing with Romans in the area of relationships. First, he talks about using the gifts in the local church, then almost like concentric circles, that is, circles that go out from the center. He starts to talk about not only using your gifts in the church, but then he talks about your characteristics of life as you relate not only to church members, but to people outside the church. And then in the next circle, he seems to go out even further, where he talks about going out to government authority. And that's what we looked at yesterday. Today he goes out one more circle, and now he talks about just population in general. And here's what he says, beginning at verse 8. Owe nothing to anyone except to love one another, for he who loves his neighbor has fulfilled the law. Now, that's an interesting statement. He says, if you love your neighbor, you fulfilled the law. Well, it's not exactly correct from the standpoint that the law considers two relationships. And Jesus certainly taught about those two relationships. One is to God and the other one is to our neighbors. But let's go on. In verse 9 it says, for this you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet. And if there is any other commandment, it is summed up in this saying, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. So what did he name? He named the 10 commandments right out of the book of Exodus chapter 20. He says, no adultery, no murder, no stealing, no coveting. And then he says, and if I didn't cover all of those that relate to our neighbors, then remember that we're to treat our neighbor as we would want to be treated. We're to love our neighbors as ourselves. Now, what he didn't cover, of course, were the first of the commandments, the 4 commandments as they relate to our relationship to God. And that's really quite interesting because, you see, in my opinion, the first 4 will make it much easier for you to keep the next 6. That is, if you think about the first 4 commandments being our relationship to God, and our relationship with God is correct, the relationship to our neighbor is going to be much easier. And we're going to find that if he's in control of our life, then our lives will examine that. Jesus was asked that question in Matthew chapter 22, verses 36 through 40. Jesus was asked, teacher, what is the greatest commandment in the law? And here's what Jesus responded in verse 37. He says, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the great and foremost commandment. But he doesn't stop there. He says the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments depend the entire law and the prophets. So Jesus got right to the point, didn't he? He said you can just boil down all 10 commandments in 2. One in our relationship with God, the second in our relationship with fellow man. And in both cases, the key word is love. Love the Lord your God with all your mind and with all your heart and with all your soul. And remember to love your neighbor as yourself. Those are 2 great commandments. Not always easy to keep. Sometimes the desires of the flesh interfere with our relationship, our love relationship with God. And sometimes the flesh interferes with our relationship with man. But it's a good thing to step back once in a while and take a look at perspective. If I get my relationship right with God first, then it'll be much easier for me to get my relationship with man in the proper state. And remember what he already said in a previous verse in the book of Romans. He said, as much as depends on you. Sometimes your neighbors aren't that easy to keep in a loving relationship. But as much as depends on us, we go more than halfway. And that's the Christ-like way, to go more than halfway to try to keep peace, even with neighbors that are not as easy to love as others. It's your thought for the day. God bless you and have a great day.